Welcome to the Manders Mindset podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest's mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am so excited to be here with today's guest. I am here today with Ann Hince, and Ann has literally shifted her skull. Not only her mindset, but she has shifted her skull as well. She's developed the ability to sense inside her body and release physical tension stored in connective tissue using solely the focus of her mind. And we are going to get into the specifics of how she did that today. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Of course. So, who would you say Ann is at the core?
At the core, I have not found my core yet, but I'm heading that direction, and it will be my perfect blueprint of who I was supposed to be before I was programmed like everyone else was, right? And stored all that tension inside of me. I'm reversing that and will find my blueprint at some point.
I love that you'll find your blueprint. So can you take us down memory lane? Tell us a little bit about your childhood, family dynamic, however deep you want to take that.
Sure. There are lots of things that happened in my childhood. I lived in all sorts of different countries to begin with. I was actually conceived in New Zealand and born in England. My mother went by boat and across Canada in midwinter hitchhiking in the 60s. And eventually got to England. I was born with my right foot up against my right shin. So my whole body was twisted when I was born at birth. And had a little physical therapy to release my foot at that point. It didn't release the rest of me. So I've had scoliosis my whole life. But at 6 weeks after that, I was handed over for adoption into a family who just suffered a trauma. So they couldn't have children. So they adopted a little boy, and he was 2. And then they adopted another little girl. And then the birth mother changed her mind. So they had to hand that little baby back. I don't know how long they had her, but they had her a significant amount of time. It's less than 6 months, but more than a month or 2. And I was the replacement into the family for that loss, which meant my mother didn't really connect with me because she was afraid, I think, that my birth mother would do the same thing, right? That's natural. So she didn't. So at 6 months, we moved to Barbados. And from there, we moved to Sierra Leone in West Africa. And while we were in Sierra Leone, I woke up one morning, I must have been around 4 or 5 years old, and I saw flames coming in my bedroom wall where the ceiling attaches to the wall. So I alerted everyone that the house was on fire. And that was not a great thing because I actually went to the top of the stairs. It was morning, early morning. My dad was downstairs drinking coffee, listening to the radio loud. And I shouted down, "Dad, there's a fire in my bedroom." And his response was, "No, there can't be." Like a 4 or 5-year-old would lie about something like that. So that's part of the programming. I think children learn earlier on. And I learned early on that what I said was questioned, right? People wouldn't believe what I say. So, that's part of my journey. Then we moved to Hong Kong. And when we're in Hong Kong, at the age of 9, I was sent to boarding school in England. And I was sent to my brother's boarding school, which was a boys' boarding school. So for the first year, I was the only girl boarder in a boys' boarding school. And the boys were aged 9 through 13, which is not an easy age. And I was teased mercilessly by those boys, just horrifically. So there was that. And for my teenage years, both of my parents became alcoholics. My mum would drink a whole bottle of sherry a day. And Dad would go to the pub for hours at a time and come back absolutely, drunk. So I had to go through that. And then when I was 19, I woke up one morning and found my mother dead on the bathroom floor. She had cancer. She had throat and lung cancer from drinking and smoking. And one of the tumors in her throat burst overnight. So it was a bit messy, and I was the one who found her in the morning.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I've worked through it now. So if you're hearing this and you're triggered, I apologize, but I'm not anymore. So that was the big trauma in my life. It was bigger than all the other ones. So it sat on top of all the other ones. And I was hoping that it would just disappear because I didn't know how to deal with trauma. I had no idea. English people don't necessarily do that very well. So I kept it all suppressed. And I moved out to the States when I was 21, hoping I'd leave it all behind in England. But of course, we don't do that. So I carried on with life. And it wasn't until my late 30s I actually started to realize that my childhood was still affecting me. So that was the start of my journey to unwind it all.
Now, when you said you were 19 years old, that mom, was that your adoptive mom?
That was my adopted mum. Yes. I actually met my birth mother when I was 17, and she's still alive, and she's back in New Zealand. She lives in New Zealand. Yes.
How was that, meeting your birth mom at 17?
Oh, that was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. It was crazy how emotional it was. I couldn't lift my eyes up from the ground to look at her. It took so much effort to actually, I could hear her, talking to my adopted parents, but just lifting my eyes up to see her was really, really emotional, physically emotional.
I bet. Good emotions?
Yeah, she's nice. Yes. But then it brought up all the other emotions, why would you have given me away? And this is what I ended up with. I ended up with 2 alcoholic parents. It's like, and all this trauma. And I don't think I would have had that if I'd have stayed with her. But she was single and 26, and she thought it was the best thing.
And so then you said, fast forward in your 30s, you realized you hadn't dealt with it.
But, it wasn't just a simple realization. I actually had to have something happen to make that realization. And it was a business altercation with 2 other mothers at my boys' school. And these women were not like me. I was just scared mother on the inside. I had complex PTSD from all my trauma in childhood. I was afraid all the time. I was afraid of doing the wrong thing. And these 2 women were very self-confident, self-assured, authority type women in my mind. And they told me I'd done something wrong. And I just could not stop my mind spinning. For 3 days, it went over and over. What did I say? Could I have said it differently? What did they say? Could something have been different? Just all the different permutations. My mind just couldn't stop. And I realized at the end of that, first of all, this isn't normal. Most people wouldn't react that intensely to something that really wasn't that much of a big deal. But I also realized it felt a little bit like how I would react when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong. So that was the little opening. Oh, maybe something from my childhood is still affecting me. So that was the first little opening.
So what did you do when you noticed this opening?
Well, I didn't know what to do. So I carried on with life for a little bit, but it was in that time frame I went to a doctor's appointment, and he was a holistic physician. So he had more tools in his toolbox than most doctors do. And he recognized that I was more stressed than I should be. I don't remember why I went to him. It was nothing to do with mental health, but he just was very observant. And he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was. And I said 8. And then he asked me why. And it was that question that made me realize, oh, well, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19, which was 2 decades prior to this appointment. Because the tears from that event were still just under the surface. They'd been there all those years, and I had not done anything about them. I hadn't looked at them. I kept them hidden. And so that was the first thing. And he happened to know this technique that's called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping. Have you ever heard of it?
I have.
So he tapped with me about my mother's death for about 15 minutes. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story of her death in my mind without the tears there for the first time ever. So that's when I realized that we hold those memories and those emotions physically in our body, and that we can let them go. So I went home and I started to learn everything I could about EFT. And it was back in the early days of the technique. So Gary Craig, who developed it, he had a workbook that you could download for free online and videos you could watch. So I just learned everything I could, and then I tried it out. I mean, that one event with the doctor, that one episode, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure after that. Maybe it was a fluke. Who knows? But I have an engineering. I used to be a software engineer. I have an engineering mindset. I don't like to waste my time on something that's not going to work. So I tried it out. I actually wanted to do an experiment on it. And at the time, I had a 17-year-old cat at home, and his kidneys were starting to fail. So I was told I had to give him a daily saline shot, so an injection of saline solution. And I hated needles, absolutely hated needles. And the first time I gave him that shot, my hand was shaking so badly. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it every day. I had to do something different. So I tried out the technique. I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting him with the injection. And I tapped about all my memories from all the injections I had from moving around the world. I had a lot. And the next day, when I gave him the shot, the needle just slid right in. There was no more fear left inside of me at all. And that's when I realized, first of all, I realized how powerful EFT was at that point. But I also realized that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be on the other side of all that fear. I wanted to be in that place of freedom. So that's when I really started using it. So I started using it every day. I would notice when I was emotional and I would tap, bring myself back to peace. And I started to become less reactionary, which was nice as a parent. And I wanted more and I wanted it faster. So I wrote down every emotional memory I could think of from my childhood. And I tapped through one each night for an hour to an hour and a half each night until I'd gone through them all.
Okay. So you use this to help you with the cat. What else did you use this to help you with?
Well, it was mostly my emotions, right? I would just start noticing during the day when, I had 2 young boys. So I was triggered a lot. Every time I would be triggered by something, I would take a moment out to myself. I would tap, totally accept what I'm feeling or talk through what it is I'm feeling or what happens. And the tapping allows the energy to release from the nervous system, right? So if your normal reaction is to go in fear, right, to be afraid of something, the tapping interrupts that normal response and it allows the energy to release. So when you do that enough times, you stop reacting the same way. You're not triggered the same way. So the fear's not there. So life starts to change, right? Because if I'm at peace, I tend to attract that in people around me as well. So the whole household started to become peaceful, which was really nice.
I love that. And now what was your next step now you discover EFT, then where do you go from here?
Right. So what I realized EFT is doing is it's opening up the subconscious mind. So for example, I would tap through my mother's death. I did that first time with a doctor, but then I did again at home. And each time I did it, I would remember a little bit more detail of what happened that day, right? That's the subconscious mind opening up. And as the subconscious mind opens up, our self-awareness deepens. So over time, I started to become aware of my emotions, which I hadn't been before because I would suppress them all. So I became aware of my own emotions. Then I became aware of the physical sensations underneath the emotions. So when we're emotional, say frustration, right? When we're frustrated, we use that word to describe how we're feeling. We're actually feeling tension somewhere in our body, and we call that frustration. But most of us aren't aware of that tension. So I became aware of that tension. And at the time, I was going through a group. We were studying a book, and the guru every week he would say, you don't have to meditate. It's all about feeling your feelings. And he would say it every week, but I had never been aware of my feelings before. So when I became aware of my feelings, I thought, okay, well, let me try out what he said. If it's all about feeling your feelings, how do you feel your feelings? I didn't know at that time, so I tried it. I was doing the dishes one day, and I noticed I had a thought that was emotional. For example, I'm afraid of making a phone call, right? That's just the thoughts, and there's fear there. So I would think the thought, I'm afraid of making that phone call. I would find out, feel, or sense where the fear was inside of me, which would be like my solar plexus area. So then I had to try and feel those feelings. So feel that fear. And I realized I couldn't do it if I was breathing, right? If I was taking a deep breath or if the breath was moving, I couldn't keep my focus on the fear. So I would hold myself like a statue. I wouldn't move. I wouldn't breathe. I would just feel the fear and keep feeling the fear. And at some point, I'll obviously have to take a deep breath and relax, right? So I would do that. And then I would think the thought again. I'm afraid of making this vocal. I would focus on the fear and do it again. And if the fear would diminish and eventually it would disappear, at which point it becomes easy to make the phone call, right? Because there's no more fear there. So I started to do that every day instead of the tapping. At that point, I'd worked through all my childhood traumas at that point. So I went through and did collective traumas, things like 9/11, right? We all had our own personal experience of that event. We watched different programs about it. We stored different emotions around it. So I would bring those memories to mind and just allow myself to feel them, and they would leave. So that was my second step. I would just do that. I'd lay on the sofa at night and just feel feelings, and it felt really good to let them release.
Wow, I bet. Okay. Now, you mentioned this guy was telling you you just need to feel your feelings. You don't need to meditate. You just got to feel them. So do you meditate?
I don't. People say that what I do looks a little bit like meditation, but I'm very busy inside because I'm sensing. I'm not trying to quiet my mind, but I'm out of my thinking mind. I'm in my sensing mind. So I'm not thinking, which is what people try and often do in meditation, right? They try and stop thinking. I'm not thinking, I'm feeling, I'm sensing. So I do think there are benefits to meditation because, right, in the moment of meditation, you're at peace. And when we're at peace, we're attracting peace. But this is deeper than just meditation. It's deeper than clearing the mind. It's actually changing us at a physical, energetic level. So it's changing everything that we attract.
Yeah. Now, you said the sensing mind. What would you say the sensing mind is?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. There are different parts of our mind that people talk about as being where we sense sensations, but there's also the more of the brain stem, like more of the primitive mind is also sensing. So I'm not quite sure how, those physical names of brains and stuff fits in with what I'm talking about. I'm sure it does. I just don't know exactly how that works.
No, I gotcha. I was just curious, like your definition of what you meant by like you're feeling it.
Right. I used to say I'm out of my mind, but that sounds a little funny. So now I say I'm not in my thinking mind, I'm in my sensing mind, which I think is probably more accurate. Tell me how, or sense your right kneecap, right? And put it in words how it's feeling. In the moment that you're sensing it, right, that you then translate that into words. The translation into words is the thinking mind. Before you did that, in the moment that you felt how it felt, that is the sensing mind. Yeah.
Why?
See the difference?
Yeah.
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 So I can stay in that sensing for long enough now that something will release. But early on, I could only do that momentarily sensing how something felt. So with time, I practice more and more, like feeling the feelings. You're feeling them, right? You're sensing them in the body, and you just get better and better at doing it, right? It becomes more like a laser focus, a laser beam that allows you to sense really intently. And then I'll carry on with my story. So that's what I call the second step. As I was doing that, laying on the sofa, just feeling feelings, one time I realized I could keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released. And it's hard to put something like that into words, but those are my words. It felt very different, right? Imagine you have a stomach ache or a toothache, right? You can pinpoint with your mind where that pain is coming from. But once the pain is gone, you can't get your awareness back inside that tooth or back inside the stomach because there's nothing calling your attention to it anymore. I realized I could put my awareness inside and keep it there. So then I started to play. I'd never heard of this before. I didn't know what I was doing. It was fun. So I moved my awareness around. I was in my abdomen at the time, my lower right abdomen, and I moved it around. I moved my awareness around inside my body. And I realized I could find a place that had tension compared to a place that had no tension. I could feel the difference. So I would find a place for tension. I would focus on it, and there would be a release. I could feel something release, just like happened with EFT, right, with the emotions, just like happened with sensing the feelings or feeling the feelings. I could feel something release. So I didn't have to try and do anything to it, right? It's just about acceptance. I would notice it, feel it, allow it to be there, just focus on it. And as soon as it had enough attention, it would release. So then I started to move around my body and just do more and more of that. And eventually it took many, many months before I could put my awareness inside my head, inside my skull. And that was huge. That difference there was huge because I suddenly became aware of this massive tension, massive pain, unbearable pain almost in my left cheek. And it was connected to my right foot that had been up against my shin when I was born. And I had not been aware of it. It had been stuck inside my subconscious mind for 50 years, and I hadn't been aware of it until I was able to put my awareness inside my head.
Wow. So how was it more difficult to put awareness inside your head?
Yeah, it was more difficult to get there, right? It took months of work before I was able to put it in there. And then that pain, I could only focus on it for like a second at a time to begin with, because it was so unbearably painful. And just over time, I would just focus on it and it would release, focus, release, just over and over many times a day for months or years now, right? It's almost gone. It used to be this massive pain and knots in the connective tissue that's now broken apart. And there's some still left in the bone there and different parts in my jaw that I can still feel, that I'm still working on it. But the most interesting thing at that time, like early on when I was able to put my awareness inside my head, was that I would focus and release. And I eventually heard something like rip. It sounded like old fabric ripping. And I could hear it right by my ears. I can hear it and I could feel it release. And it was scary at the time. I didn't know what it was. I did some research at that point, and that's when I realized I was releasing adhesions in the connective tissue, right, in the fascia. So I realized, okay, I probably wasn't hurting myself. So I kept going. And just over time, more and more adhesions would release. Just kind of like if you've ever been to a chiropractor and you hear those cracks and pops, that are often bones shifting around. I have that, but also the tissue around them. And it's a weird noise, but just happens over and over. Eventually, I had some x-rays taken just from orthodontic work. I've had lots over my lifetime. So when I could feel things shifting, I could feel my skull bones relaxing, and I hadn't known they weren't relaxed, but I felt it. So the next time I had x-rays taken, I actually looked at them, right? And I looked at the old ones, and I could see that things had changed. My jaw was way off to the side. It's now much more centered. My eye sockets have aligned, and my head's always been very unsymmetrical, and it's just becoming more symmetrical now. And my neck is straightening, and I've grown 3/4 of an inch because I've been releasing that burden. And every time I release somewhere in my body, it also releases in my neck. So much tension has released that I've grown. I'm actually taller than I have ever been in my life now, in my late 50s. So it's fun.
So how did you grow in height?
It's just a release of that burden. It's in the connective tissue. It pulls us tight. All those memories, all that trauma, it pulls us tight, and connective tissue pulls with a force of 2,000 pounds per square inch, which is massive when you think about it, but we're just not aware of it, right? That's why that pain was so intense, but had been subconscious. So we hold this tension subconsciously. And if you look at photos of people when they're old versus when they're young, it's often the neck that shrinks, right, as we age. So this kind of reverses that process.
Wow. I'm so amazed at that. Okay. Now, did it hurt you physically?
It's sometimes uncomfortable. Yeah. I mean, at this point, I'm releasing tension in my atlas and axis bones, right? The ones at the very top of your neck. And yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I can feel it needs to crack. So I just hold my awareness on it. I give it attention until my body will know how to crack it. And it will release that tension and it will crack.
Now, I want to transition to Chad. You mentioned that you have a slightly different way of thinking of the law of attraction. Can you explain that?
I understand it now than I did before. And I think of it as we emit a signal every second of every day. And that signal is not just our thoughts, right? People talk about it as being just our thoughts. That's such a small part of it. Everything about us is part of that signal. It's our gender, it's our size, it's our shape, it's our color, it's our hair, it's our clothes. Every single thing about us is part of that signal. But because I realized the force of this connective tissue that's pulling because of our traumas and our programming, it's that tension that we hold inside from our past. It's part of the signal that we emit, and then we attract back based on the signal that we're emitting. So to really change what we're attracting into our life, we have to change ourselves at that deep level. And so, to me, it's so obvious at this point, and that's how it works. But it does mean that we have to bring up a lot of the darkness inside of us if we really want to attract the best things in life. We actually have to go inside and bring up those really dark emotions that we've hidden away for so long. And on a collective level, I think we're seeing that now in many countries around the world, because we're having things happen that really bring up those deepest emotions inside of us. And they're coming up for us to actually look at and to clear out so that we stop attracting those things into our collective future.
What would you say would be the first step?
The first step is always noticing our feelings, because most of the time we get caught up in them, right? We might get really, really mad with something that's happening. We actually have to be able to stand back and say, okay, look at me, I'm getting mad. Until we can do that, we can't do anything about it. So that's always the first step. And it takes practice. To begin with, I would only notice maybe once a day. I'd be able to stop myself and notice, okay, I'm getting mad or I'm getting sad or whatever. But as time went by, I kept practicing and it became easy. I mean, now it happens. Probably 99% of the time, I'm aware when I'm getting emotional. And if I'm not, I will notice later and I will go back and work on what it was I was emotional about.
Wow. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Then after noticing, what would you say?
Well, I would recommend EFT just because it's free. Anyone can learn it. It's easy. You can do it anywhere, anytime. Although some people think it looks a little strange, so they might want to do it in the bathroom when you're a lot on your own. But that's a great technique. There are other techniques that work. It has to have a physical component to it because of what I realized, right? It's tension stored in the body. So we can't just say, okay, I'm letting that go. Like that doesn't do it because it's stored physically in the body, in the connective tissue, right? So the tapping itself attaches into that, right? It hooks into the connective tissue and it allows the energy to release. So something like that, something like EMDR, people talk about the emotion code. I don't know much about that, but there are some other things that work. I just recommend EFT because it's free and it's so easy to do. Then you work on how you're feeling, right? You bring yourself back to peace. And every time you do that, you're changing your future because you're letting go some of the tension stored in your body.
Yeah. Okay. What are some of the changes you've noticed outside of like the big ones?
Hey, well, there's a couple of fun ones that I'll just share because I mean, most of them are me being peaceful. Most of those are the big ones because they affect everything around you, right? They affect everyone you know. So that's the big one. But a couple of the fun ones are I can not only now hear with my ears, right, but I can sense music in my body. I can feel it in my body, feel the sound vibrations throughout my body, which of course makes listening to music a higher dimensional experience, right? But also, I believe I can now hear or sense when I'm having a conversation, right? I can sense more things, not only in myself, but in other people, because I have that depth of awareness inside myself. So I can sense where I'm tense inside of myself, so I can sense that in other people, right? When people lie, they don't want to breathe deeply into themselves because they don't want to see that lie, right? Because it's uncomfortable. So I can tell when people are not breathing deeply into themselves more than I could before. So that was one of the things. One of the other fun things is because I'm releasing so much tension in my skull, our skull is our echo chamber for our voice. So I can now sing different notes than I could before. There are some notes that I couldn't get to before, and I couldn't sing for very long before, but I can hold a note now for a long time, and I can sing. I'm never going to be singing out loud to other people, but I sing in the shower and in the car, right? And I can, my voice is different, which is fun.
Really? Your voice is different.
Yeah. And my dad used to tease me about my voice when I was a child. And he was also a narcissist. So anything I said, if it didn't agree with him, wasn't allowed. So I ended up not talking. I would just not say anything. So I held my voice back for a long time. So all this work has released all that tension. Probably not all of it yet, but a lot of it.
Yeah. No, so many of us do, even if it's not our whole upbringing, even if it's one little comment and we're hesitant to say it, and it stays in us. It doesn't have to be like this huge, grand old thing that so many people think it has to be, but it could be a small thing that you didn't say that gets suppressed in you.
Especially when there's something that you want to say and then you hold yourself from saying it. You actually hold yourself in tension, right? You tighten yourself, and that tension gets stored in the connective tissue. It stays there until it's been felt and released. Absolutely. It's small things, it's big things, it's all sorts of things. A lot of programming. We're not aware of how much we're programmed. I mean, we're programmed by our parents, right? They tell us what to do and what not to do. We're programmed by school, where we're forced into this box. We can ask questions sometimes we can't. We can go to the bathroom or not. All that programming, and then like religion programs us, society programs us, right? We have to pay taxes at certain times and we get in trouble if we don't. There's just so much programming, and all of that, when we're held back from being who we really want to be, that gets stored as tension. And some of it's really deep, right? I'm releasing tension inside my bones that I had no idea was there. So most of it is subconscious. We just don't know it's there, but it is.
Noah, yeah, it's so true. I facilitate something called breathwork, and people tap into that with that as well, uncovering like things we've suppressed, It's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, you have experience with breathwork?
I do, yes.
I love that. I'm a breathwork fanatic, so anytime anybody says that, I'm like,
okay. Yeah, let me ask you something about it. So when I did it the last few times, it felt like there was this, do you know what a toroid is? Like a tube of, like a polo mint tube of energy going around something.
okay.
I felt like that in my hands, and each individual finger felt like it was just bursting with energy. So much crazy energy in my hands and my fingers. Have you heard of that?
That can happen. There's a lot of crazy things that you can experience, a lot of physical like sensations. I've had people not be able to move their arms. They felt like they were like tied down. I had a woman actually tell me I should have given her anesthesia before I had her do breathwork. I was like, you're freezing. But
talking of that, there's some really interesting things that happen in the body, in the physical body, as you start to unwind and release all this tension that's been stored inside. So I would have things like when I started working on my jaw, it started to unwind on its own, right? I would relax, like release as much as I could and just relax my muscles, and my lower jaw would start going back and forth like a metronome, unwinding tension. I could stop it whenever I wanted to, but I would just relax. And when I relaxed, it would start going back and forth, just releasing tension. So I actually had that happen like in all in my limbs as well. But it was just most interesting with my jaw. It was like, yeah, I could look in the mirror. Oh, it's just going back and forth, just unwinding itself. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I want to transition a tad. You're a former engineer. What made you make that transition?
Well, I was an engineer and then I had kids. So when I had kids, I stopped being an engineer. And it was during when my kids were young that I actually started doing this unwinding process.
Okay.
I actually think it's given me the ability to explain it reasonably well, right? It's not easy concepts to put into words, but I think my kind of engineering mind allows me to try and do that as well as I possibly can.
That makes sense. And you're an author. You wrote a book.
I did. I wanted to write down everything I could remember about this journey because I knew I was going to move on, right? I'd been through those steps and I didn't want to forget all the intricacies of the journey and like the jaw, right? The releasing things that happen in the body. I wanted to put them into words while I could remember them. So that's what the book is about. It's called The Pathway to Insight because this is insight. It's like inward sight. It's inside sight. I can see inside my body, which people talk about the opening of the inner eye or the third eye. This is what it is. I mean, I know this is what it is, but a lot of people have different experiences where they're talking about outside of the body, right? They're talking about seeing spirits or whatever, more of the woo-woo stuff. This is very grounded. What I'm talking about is very grounded. It's sensing physically inside the body. It's looking inside the body.
And you created a workbook to go with that, I saw.
I did. It's got all sorts of questions to bring up all our traumas and all our beliefs and all the stuff that's stuck inside of us.
I love that, though. People can really delve deep with it, like reading it, but not applying it. It's only half the battle.
Right? You got to do the work. Yeah, you've really got to do the work. And it's amazing work. A lot of people think this kind of work, which can be called shadow work, is terrifying. They think it's going to annihilate them to look at their past because some traumas are really bad. And I actually trigger warning people, right? I actually don't tell people what was the worst one, which was when we were in Hong Kong and I was driving in the car. My dad was driving and my brother and I were in the back seat. And he was so angry. Like the saliva was sputtering from his mouth. He was so furious. And we were driving through a crowded marketplace. With his steering wheel was going back and forth because he was so angry and he ran over a girl's ankle. And we were in this crowded market full of Chinese people and the car was surrounded, right? And we got this wounded child outside with her mother and it was a pretty horrific event. And, that didn't come to mind until I had let go of some of my other traumas because it was hidden. Because it was so traumatic, right? So it is scary to do this work if we have big traumas, but the freedom is on the other side, right? Those emotions are simply energy that is stuck inside the body. The memories don't exist outside of us, right? They only exist inside of us. And so they're our responsibility and we can work with them and we can release them and we can find that freedom on the other side. So it's absolutely worth doing the work.
I completely agree. But I loved that you had a workbook. I'm big on applying the stuff. I read the Atomic Habits book and he had a workbook and I did the workbook and I noticed the most change, even in myself personally, because reading the book's so great and listening to the podcast, but what's the practical next step? You know what I mean? Now what?
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, if someone did the whole workbook, their life would absolutely change. They'd be in a different reality.
So when I saw that you had one, I was like, I love that. A lot of people write books and not everybody does a workbook. So I really loved that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Just because it can help people put it into action.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's where the changes happen.
Now, you believe everything happens for a reason, even though you've been through all this challenging stuff, everything happens for a reason?
Well, I think it happens for a reason after age 7, after we've grown a little bit. I think we're programmed in those first few years of life, right? That's when our mind is open, we're sponges, we take everything in, right? Including the traumas. So we store all those memories and those emotions inside of us. And from then on, we keep replaying similar things so that we feel the same emotions so that we can heal them. Right? So it's definitely not our fault that we have all those traumas in childhood, but that's what our work is then as adults, is to notice when we're emotional, notice how those emotions relate back to our childhood and work through those memories and those emotions that were stuck inside. And then we can move on to being our true self. But until we've done that work, we're not our true selves.
You mentioned not 0 to 7, that not everything happens for a reason between then.
Afterwards, I don't know why things happen in those first few years. Like they just happen, and we take it all in, right? Because our brain waves are such that we just absorb it at that point. So we absorb all aspects of what it is we're going through, right? So if it's a trauma, we absorb what we go through and what every other person who's there goes through. So if we have two parents and one, say the father is shouting at the mother, we absorb what it's like to be the one who's doing the shouting. And we get to observe what it's like to be the one who's being shouted at, right? So we're absorbing all those different aspects of it. So as an adult, we might become the victim or we might become the perpetrator. We have both of them inside of us, right? And so when we're working through our traumas and our memories, we really want to work through them from everyone's point of view, to go back and look at them from our father's point of view and our mother's point of view and our point of view, right? To really clear out that wound. And when we do that, we're not going to become either the victim or the perpetrator because we'll have cleared that out.
I like that.
And one of the reasons that I really believe that, I know it because I've done that work myself, but I've listened to some near-death experiences where people say, where they go through the life review, they see it from everyone's point of view, right? They feel it from everyone's point of view. So if we can do that work ahead of time, things are going to be very different when we actually do pass on. We won't have to relive those emotions that are stored inside of us because we actually do that work now, which is what I believe Jesus meant when he said to die before you die. It's like, let's do that work now, which is in effect could be called ego death. And then when we actually die, right?
Everybody sees it from different perspectives, even if you didn't think about it like as a child, but there's 3 different sides to every situation or every story. I've heard that before, and it's so true. Like your side, their side, in the truth. You see it differently than they see it,
Our siblings think, everyone thinks differently about the memories. I mean, that house fire that I was in, my brother was in the same room, and I don't think I woke him up. I mean, he's passed now, so I can't ask him about it, but he was 2 years older than I was, and I woke up and saw the flames. And I have a feeling he wasn't with me at the top of the stairs. So I think I left him in the bedroom, right? So his experience of that day would have been very different because he would have woken up. I think he was probably woken up by my dad coming in and getting him out of the room. But his experience of being woken up and having the smoke probably by then, smoke and flames in the bedroom, would have been very different from mine. So, yeah.
That's true. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I really appreciate it. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
I have, yes.
So he's got a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends his podcast with 2 segments, and I incorporated them and end my podcast with them. First segment is the many sides to us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each. What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Peaceful?
What is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Quiet.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Authentic.
What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you, or agree with you mindset would choose to describe you as?
Maybe a know-it-all, because I know my experience so much now. I'm very confident in it.
What is one word you're trying to embody right now?
Peace.
Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
I don't remember where I heard it from, but I've really integrated it, or at least I did at the beginning of the story of my journey, is that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we have not experienced yet. That opened my mind because I realized I was not changing as rapidly as I wanted to. And these other people, these other spiritual teachers seemed to know what they were talking about. So I allowed myself to open up to what their experience was, and it really helped me.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
Maybe that's a societal thing where everything seems to be about money. It's not all about money.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Oh, working hard.
Working hard?
Yeah. As a software engineer, it's just grind all the time. And, I had up to a 2-hour commute, and it was just so overwhelming. I used to get overwhelmed a lot, and I don't now. So, yeah.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
And help the world find inner peace and outer peace, world peace.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
They would have to notice how they were feeling and feel the feelings and not suppress them, which is especially important for children. So, because we store them, right? And if we never store them in the first place, we don't have to relive them again as adults.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for speaking with me. I really appreciate it. And where can listeners connect with you?
They can connect with me on Facebook. I'm very active on Facebook, or on my website, annhince.com. I have a retreat coming up in July that is for women who've lost a parent. And we're going to go through all this work in person. We're going to do this work of feeling the feelings around that loss and around the future without the parents, which is what I did, right, with my mother's death, going through my mother's death. So that's going to be an amazing event. And I'm looking forward to meeting the women who are going to come on that.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I haven't lost my mom, but oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful offering that you're doing. That really is.
Thank you.
And no pressure whatsoever, but do you have any final words of wisdom, anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Sure. Actually, 2 things. I should have mentioned that if you go to my website, there's a PDF download of my summary of EFT. It's 2 pages, everything you need to know about EFT and how to do it yourself. So there's that. But one of the things I love to share with people is that there is so much more depth to life than we're aware of. Right? 20 years ago, I had no idea that we could feel sensations in our body. We could feel music throughout our body. So there's so much more to life than you're probably experiencing right now. And doing this work will show it to you. You'll start to enjoy life more. You'll start to be more peaceful during your life. And it's absolutely worth doing.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Ann. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. I'd appreciate it if you left a rating, left a review, and subscribe to the show. And stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks, guys. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.